Well, hello and welcome to the Move Early, Move Often chat. I am Blake Martin, and I have with me today, I have Thomas Karakolis, Dr. Thomas Karakolis. Welcome, Thomas.
Hello, Blake. This is glad to be with you again.
Yeah, so we've been talking about what are some of the things we should discuss, and obviously we want to invite anybody who watches any of these sessions. If there's something that you want us to talk about, please be sure to let us know in the comments below, and we'll do our best to tackle that topic. But today, specifically, we want to take a look at this whole idea of moving often, and as part of the name, and it's a really dear topic to you, Thomas. You spent a lot of your years of your life looking at it. So maybe you can just kind of lead off and talk a little bit about moving off and some of the research that you know about and that you did yourself.
Yeah, I guess I'll start by giving a bit of a background because I don't know how intuitive this necessarily is to everybody because the at least my intuition would have initially been, hey, I'm just sitting there. I'm not doing anything. There's no way I can hurt myself. There's no way I can become injured. And that is completely not true. Not to get too engineering on people, but there's this idea or theory or phenomenon, let's call it, which is called uh, viscoelastic creep. And the idea,
Viscoelastic creep.
yes, that's exactly what
Isn't
it's
that a
called.
song by Radiohead?
No. You're thinking of the song "Creep" by
Oh,
Radiohead.
okay.
Yeah, what the
So
hell are we doing here?
viscoelastic.
Yeah, yeah. And so the concept, the engineering concept is creep. And the best way to kind of think about it is if you have a piece of gum and you kind of take the gum out of your mouth, which is gross, obviously, but you were to start pulling on it and you just keep pulling on it, you don't have to add any more force, like a spring, for example. So spring, the further you pull it, the harder it gets to pull, and you have to add more force
Right.
to pull it further. But a piece of gum, that's not the case. What ends up happening is you end up pulling on it with the exact same force, and it'll just keep extending until what ultimately happens, Blake.
Well, it'll snap and
Yeah, you see that they kind of got it.
it'll get stuck to your hand.
Yeah. So the getting stuck to your hand part's not really what I'm trying to demonstrate here. The snapping part is
Okay.
actually the key of what we want to be talking about. And so your biological tissues in your body, so muscles to a certain extent, but more ligaments and soft tissue in your spine, for example, like your intervertebral discs, they actually are affected by this phenomenon, and it's a negative effect. So what happens is, as you continue to sit, for example, in prolonged seated posture, your pelvis, like so your hips essentially, will start rotating forward. And as that happens, the muscles and the ligaments and the parts of your disc in the back of your back, I guess, for lack of a better description for that, they continue to stretch over time. And so if you stay in that position for too long a period of time and you keep doing it repetitively for days, weeks, months, years of your life, you can end up developing chronic pain and chronic injuries just by sitting and doing absolutely nothing. So that's
So so is it cumulative? Like if I do it one day and then I come out of that position and then I go back into the same position the next day for several hours, will it add on from day to day, or is it the sort of thing that if I undo it, I kind of reset to zero each day?
yes and no is the answer to that question. To a certain extent, our body does have the ability to heal and repair itself. So
Right.
if we don't do it for long enough, obviously our body will repair itself and you'll reset essentially. But the time frames, it's highly dependent on what you're doing and how long you've been sitting for. So in my PhD research, I used discomfort as a surrogate to this creep phenomenon because it's very difficult to measure in vivo. So when people are actually alive and doing stuff, but
So you would have to kill them and then take them apart if you really wanted to study it.
yeah, but the problem with that is now the biological tissue is no longer alive, so it doesn't have
Oh.
this regenerative type of response where it repairs itself. So
Otherwise, killing them would be entirely acceptable.
no, still the answer is obviously no to that question as well, Blake. But the the point is that it's a very complex question to answer, and there's still
Right.
a bunch of research going on in this field. But what I found during my dissertation research, at least, was that I had a 3 hour paradigm where people would sit for 50 minutes. Then they would stand for 10, sit for 50, stand for 10, sit for 50, stand for the final 10. And I compared that condition to a condition where they just stood for 3 straight hours
Right.
and where they just sat for 3 straight hours. And what happened is their discomfort, largely related to this creep phenomenon of their tissue, would continue to rise as their tissue would creep through the 3 hours in
Okay.
both this seated and standing
Oh,
position.
okay.
When they alternated in that sit stand paradigm, they would have a temporary relief of that discomfort, indicating that the creep response was mitigated slightly when they alternated postures. But over the 3 hour period, when they started developing more discomfort in sitting, just because they were doing that for 50 minutes, they didn't fully recover back to a baseline. So even alternating between two static postures like sitting and standing over a 3 hour period in that 50 to 10 minute paradigm still didn't work. So the idea that we came up with after that is that you actually need to be active and move rather than just alternate between two different static postures.
So are you now? Are you the sort of person who advocates for like the treadmill desk, or in addition to the sit stand desk, or some kind of just you know, going away from your desk every few, like at the end of every hour, you save your document and you just kind of walk up and down the stairs once and then come back to your desk, that sort of thing. Is that what you're saying?
So I think you asked me a complex question, and do I advocate for any of those things? Yes, I do advocate for some of those, specifically the last thing you mentioned. So I'm not suggesting that having a sit stand desk is a bad thing. I think it's obviously beneficial. A treadmill desk is probably even more beneficial. But those are very expensive solutions. So,
Right.
given our current situation, especially with the pandemic and the economy the way that it is, the easiest thing I think for people to do is just to get up and move away from their desk.
Right. Right.
There are certain jobs where obviously you're kind of tied to your desk, and you don't have the luxury of every 45 minutes or 50 minutes at the most getting up and going up and down those stairs, going outside for a 10-15 minute walk. I understand that, but if you can, or if you can build your day around doing that, that's what I actually advocate for, Blake.
Yeah. So even things like changing your posture, but having some kind of movement, some kind of activity, and that the activity, does the activity itself, does it undo the injury state, the viscoelastic creep, or does it um, or does it just alternate some form of activity? So I guess what I'm asking is it a remedial thing? Does it make things better, or is it just a different thing?
So the answer to that is likely yes, but not definitively yes.
Right.
So likely when you're static, part of the problem is you don't have the increased vasculature and all of the fluids kind of moving around to sort of reset and then have new new pathways being injected into that sort of tissue that has creeped. So obviously being active is better than being static when you're trying to alternate between just being static and being active. But in terms of how regenerative a 5 to 10 or 15 minute walk is going to be, we don't know the answer to that question.
Right. So by vasculature, you mean like the blood vessels and the
Yeah,
lymphatic vessels that return fluid, from the limbs back to where it came from, so that it can be circulated throughout the body.
exactly, Blake. Yeah. So one of the things that you I'd really advocate for is just making sure that you can kind of almost get your heart rate to go up. That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah,
Where
for sure.
if you could break a sweat, even better. But basically, make your body feel like it's doing something rather than a static posture. Now,
Right.
if you can't do that, I want to do a little quick shout out to one of the functional Fridays you did. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, and you showed that with no almost no equipment at all, you can alternate postures at your own desk, and you can incorporate some stretching activities to while you work. So you did some of those kneeling activities or like one-legged knee bends where you actually extended your hip while you were working, as opposed to being in this chronic flexed hip posture that we
Right.
always are in when we're sitting. And maybe you can describe some of the stuff that you kind of advocated for that last functional Friday, because
Yeah.
that's good stuff.
Yeah, well, for me, I find it really hard to sit still, and even when I'm supposed to be at some official meeting or something like that, and I am constantly kneeling by the side of my desk and switching, I'll have one knee up and then the other knee up. And so I'm kind of in a lunge position, and I switch it. I switch it constantly, and I sometimes will do a squat, and I'll bounce a little bit as well, just to get kind of a pumping effect in my calves and get that going on. So I'll link to the Functional Friday in question at the end of this video. But the big idea that I'm trying to do is I just find it super hard to be still, and so it's soul crushing. I find it really soul crushing, even though I have a desk job, and I some people like to use an exercise ball. They have their own problems because they can make if they're not properly inflated, they can make it so that your hips are below your knees, and they can also cause it so that people round their backs, and both of those things can have really negative effects as well. So I'm cautious about that, but yeah. So my big thing is just to move around my desk. I'm standing, I'm kneeling on both knees, I'm kneeling on one knee or the other, or I'm squatting, or I'm sitting at my chair. I also, I'm most frequently, so I'm at a chair now, and I sit close to the edge of my chair so that my feet can be flat on the ground. And then I'm actively using my abdominals to hold my torso up and trying to have overall a good posture. I'm not always successful, and I need reminders, but that's what I'm trying to do. Those are some of the things I'm trying to get at.
A couple of small anecdotes before we wrap this thing up, like, because I'd be remiss not to mention. So I actually, well, when we used to have offices that we could go into and
Do you
work
remember?
in,
Remember?
it was a while, but yes, I'm hoping that we're going to go back to those days at
Yeah.
some point, because I do miss it. But I do remember walking past your office through the hallway, and part of one of the biggest joys I had being in there was seeing what kind of posture you were adopting or what you were doing at your desk while you were working. So everything that you've said on this chat, I can vouch for this personally. I'll put my name on the line to say that you personally practice each and every one of those things.
I actually, you may have gone past too when I've had my foot up on a bookshelf too.
Yeah,
So
I do remember that exact time.
I'll kind of do like this stretch with my standing on one leg, straight leg, and then the other leg up on a bookshelf,
I just love it.
as high as I can get it, because I cannot be still. But
and the last
please.
anecdote I just wanted to quickly say, and it's there's evidence behind this one, and the point you raised about sitting on the edge of your seat pan, I think that's great as well, talking about activating your abdominal muscles. And there's evidence to show you mentioned the sitting on an exercise ball as being a possible solution, but there are actually some risks associated with that. If it's underinflated, you might adopt a poor posture where you'll round your back.
Exactly.
If reaching for stuff is potentially actually fall off of the exercise ball, we've done some studies on that as well. So there is evidence to show that
you could fall off the exercise ball.
Yeah, your base of support is not nearly as big when you're on an exercise ball versus when you're on a conventional task chair.
Right. So, but are you saying falling off of a chair is a negative thing?
So the point that I was trying to make here is that there's a study at Waterloo a few years ago, probably closer to 10 years ago now, showing that you actually achieve a similar level of muscle activation when you're sitting on the edge of a task chair or a task chair without any sort of back support, as you would on an exercise ball. So sitting on your task chair without using the backrest or the back support is actually just as beneficial likely as sitting on an exercise ball when you look at engaging your abdominal muscles.
Wow. So one more thing before I turn it back to you, just to kind of close out the session. I heard a presentation from some folks at University of Western Ontario, and a few years back, they made the move to say that the inactivity state is actually a disease state. And York University, the kinesiology department there, while I was doing my PhD, they followed suit and they said, okay, the inactivity state is a disease state. And so that that's very strong language. I think that the inactivity state is a disease state, and I, I see truth in it, certainly from the standpoint of just, our heart isn't pumping, our muscles are not being adequately, and our other tissues are not being adequately oxygenated, and there's other problems. Do you, before you close off, do you have anything that you would want to add to that comment?
Yeah, sitting is the new smoking, or at least that's what it was about seven
Well,
or eight
I'm
years ago.
addicted, baby.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
so
use a sitting patch.
there was a campaign, and don't quote me on who started this campaign, but it might have been WHIS or somewhere in Ontario. And they had posters everywhere that said "sitting is the new smoking," and there was some research behind that. And I don't know, I'm hesitant to say that the comorbidity or like any sort of the odds ratios for survival or mortality with sitting was related to smoking, but I think there was evidence showing that prolonged seated behavior over a lifetime was related to a whole bunch of comorbidities that include like cardiovascular disease,
Right.
and stuff along those lines, similar to someone that would be that's a chronic smoker or a lifelong smoker. They would be in poor health in their older age. People who have chronically sat for their entire lives are also likely to have poorer health outcomes as they age.
So, what would you like to tell us, just as we're closing up here on this session? Just give us a couple of pointers.
The same message I think we always try and say, Blake: move early, move often.
Right.
Try not to sit for as long as you normally do throughout the day. The more often you can move, the better. And if you find that you're sitting for too long without even realizing it, try and use some cueing techniques like a smartwatch perhaps, or a timer, or
Right.
anything simple, just to make sure that you're reminded to move often. Because a lot of times people don't actively choose to sit for a long period of time. They just get engaged so much in their task that they forget to move often.
Right. Right. Well, that's excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think that those are great words to live by. I'm going to link to that Functional Friday
Definitely.
at the end of this video, and you can just have a look at some of the alternatives that you can do. And remember that it's in part the shifting between the various activities is what's useful. You don't do
Mm-hmm.
anything for too long, and that keeps you from getting into that problem of the viscoelastic creep that Thomas was talking to us about just a little bit earlier. So anyways, thank you very much, Thomas. I really appreciate you sharing that with us today, and that was excellent. Appreciate
Perfect.
that.
We'll see you next week, Blake.
Okay, cheers. Bye.
Bye.